4 of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us as we begin a new season. We hope you had a great summer, and we are back together again, and we're very excited to begin this new journey together. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined again for the 4th season by Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
Congrats on 4 seasons of the Catholic Buzz.
It's crazy, eh?
Yeah.
It is crazy. Time flies.
Just to think that we started this because COVID happened and we couldn't have beer and wings together.
It was an excuse to get together, right?
Yeah.
So we are in the month of September, and we're kicking off a new season of the Catholic Buzz podcast. And September has brought lots of things into the forefront, both inside the church and in society. One of them, the month of September, people are starting school.
Yeah, school's a big topic.
School's a big topic, especially because near the end of September, there was this million-person march that took place all over the country. And it was basically organized because people were concerned. It was Canadians sort of concerned against gender ideology being taught in school. So that was the reason for this million-person march. A peaceful protest. Nonetheless, like every protest or every gathering, there's 2 sides to every story. And so there were counter-protests that took place. These happened in cities right across Canada. And the parents that sort of organized this protest, the narrative from their side was they're doing this to protect their children. A peaceful protest to protect their children from learning things that they don't want them learning. The narrative on the other side was this was a hate rally.
Yes.
And targeting a certain group of people.
We've seen this in everything. I mean, from when the Pope came to Canada to whatever, the media twists it and makes it whatever. Like there's 2 sides to every story, as you said, but a lot of times you got to go there to be there and be present to see what's actually going on, what's the actual word. So if we go right to the source of why this purpose was, and this person is that they wanted to be able to teach the kids what they wanted. They want to have say over what their kids are learning. That makes sense to me. I'm a parent. I would totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, I would like to have some say over what my kids are being taught, at what age they're being taught. I don't think, I have my own personal beliefs, especially when it comes to my Catholic faith. And so, it makes sense.
Yeah, and maybe it's just me as I'm getting older and crustier. Maybe like it just seems like these things being taught, which parents are saying are being taught in schools, gender ideology or other things that parents are uncomfortable with their children learning. And of course, there will be people who disagree with that. People will say they should learn about it. There are people who are different from the normal family, quote unquote normal, of course. There are people who are different, who have different lifestyles and whatever it might be. So they should learn about it. But it seems like this is an increasingly it's happening more and more today. Like these things are being taught in the schools, right, to children.
Yeah.
Where I don't know when I was younger in school that all these different things were being taught in school. I don't mean gender ideology. I mean there seems to be another agenda, another flavor of the day.
It's not about math, English, history, religion. Yeah. I can see what you're saying. It's not. It doesn't seem to be about the subjects of learning.
You walk into schools and like this week's a different theme week, and this week's a different theme week, and that week is wear this shirt and wear this that, and it's like where is the education happening? That's what some people would say. Is happening in the schools. So parents, of course, education.
Education's under the spotlight right now, especially because there's some schools actually that lowered their expectations with the teenagers. This was down in the States, but they lowered their expectations, and none of the teenagers in that school, none of the students in that school passed any kind of statewide mandate.
Standardized testing or anything.
Stuff like that. None of them did because they kept lowering the standard, and letting the students set the goal. And so there's got to be a tight difference between what we expect from our students and then what we ask of them and then what is being taught to them too. Like there is that kind of tight timeline. It's a hard juggling act.
So the main question is, people are asking, are there private schools around where this stuff is sort of not being taught, or is homeschooling an option? Right? And I think homeschooling used to, if I may, and
Yeah.
I don't want to offend anyone who homeschools, but as a when I was younger,
Yeah.
homeschooling was like
A weird
the
thing.
large families who were kind of weird.
Yeah. 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 I hear
Yeah.
what you're saying.
But homeschooling now is a very legitimate option. Not that it wasn't legitimate before.
No, and if we go back before you and I were
Yeah,
younger,
yeah,
Yeah.
homeschooling was actually the thing. And
the
then
thing.
eventually we put our kids into schools,
That's right.
and whether they be community schools or small little community, you had the school teacher that taught all the grades and stuff. And then
Yes.
eventually it grew to the point of industrialized schooling, if you will, and then
Yeah.
and into bigger. But yeah, I think at one time that was where, like, for thousands of years, children learned through their elders, through their parents, through their, you know what I mean? And that's always been the case. That's kind of been always. And then it's only been the last, I'm going to say 50 years, maybe 100 years, that we've really kind of taken this industrialized, get the kids through
Mhm.
some kind of a agenda teaching, you know, uh, structure.
Would you say the Catholic Church then would support an idea like homeschooling as opposed to publicly funded education, or like where would the church sort of?
I think so. Like, well, the church's position is that whether or not
You homeschool or
you're
not.
homeschooling, whether or not your kids are in public school, whether you're like in the States they have kind of parochial schools, or they have schools that are like, there are all kinds of different education models. So there's no like the Catholic Church supports this one education model. It's just whatever you decide to do as parents, and whatever kind of context your children in, you as parents are responsible as the first or primary educator of your children. So again, this can work in public school. This can work in homeschool context, or any of these. A lot of times we feel like we're kind of passing off our kids to the state,
Yeah.
and just letting that run its course. When as you kind of said, um, even this kind of march, like if and again, you have extreme perspectives kind of getting packaged with, but at the base level, it really bringing attention to the fact that ideological forces are increasingly kind of infiltrating school in the way that when we were kids, and I went to public school, just wasn't the case. We
Yeah.
were there
Yeah.
to learn math, we were there to learn geography without it being politicized, or without it.
Every now and then there was like
Yeah.
a sell tickets for MS or something, but that's about it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So regardless of if your students, if your children are in publicly funded schools, or you're homeschooling them, or wherever they are, you're right. The church does teach that parents are the primary educators of their children,
Mhm.
which means that I think we'll talk a little bit about more homeschooling and why
Yeah.
people turn to that. But if your kids are in publicly funded schools,
Yeah.
and I say publicly funded schools because there's in where we live in Ontario, there's two types of publicly funded schools. There's publicly funded public schools,
Yeah.
and there's publicly funded Catholic schools with the name Catholic. But I don't have to tell you that they're not always living up to the name Catholic.
Yeah.
And so there's a concern for parents right there. But parents should keep a close eye more than ever. More than ever. When
On
I
their
came home from
education.
school and we were doing homework back in the day, my parents didn't know what we were doing. We were doing our homework and whatever. They didn't know what we were up to. I think parents more than ever have to keep an eye on what their kids are learning.
Yeah.
Let's ask questions. Let's see what our kids are learning. Because as parents are the primary educator of their children, they're also responsible of creating their home and protecting the ideals that they have,
Mhm.
that they're formulating within the family bond,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you don't do that when you don't know what's happening with your children at
Yeah.
school.
A big part of that is just spending time with your children,
Absolutely.
right? And that's kind of like, sometimes you got to turn down the TV, you got to turn off the TV, I should say, turn off the screen time, and just have those conversations. Maybe going for a hike where you can have a conversation in the car on the way back, or there, or on the hike. Like, those are things that you have to kind of add into your own schedule, I guess,
Mhm.
so that you can spend that family time. That's why, though, like, if you think about it, for homeschooling is not for everybody. We homeschool our children up until the point of
Mhm.
grade 9, and then we allow them, if they want to go into school, and for the most part they choose to go to high school. But I find that homeschooling really helps us with getting to know our children a little bit better.
Mm.
And if you do it right, you don't have to worry about the stereotypical weirdo
Yeah.
homeschooler ideology necessarily. In fact, most of my kids, and most homeschool kids that I know of, because we have a couple families around that homeschool, most of the kids are far above when they go into grade 9. They're like in the grade 10 or grade
Mhm.
11 levels of reading or math or English, or whatever the case may be, because they've had this individualized learning plan. And kind of, so there's some cons, there's pros and
Yeah.
there's cons to homeschooling as well. You give up a lot more time. Like, we can discuss all that stuff,
Yeah.
but um, it's a sacrifice, sometimes well worth the sacrifice. Now, again, it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
And what would you say, like, let's say there are parents out there saying, I would rather homeschool my child, or I would rather take them out of the publicly funded education system,
Yeah.
which is their prerogative.
Yeah.
And they say, well, I work,
Yeah.
I'm not a teacher.
Hmm.
Like, where do you begin?
Yeah. So there, yeah, and to kind of hit both of those, that like people homeschool for sometimes completely different reasons.
Yeah.
So and our context here is like in response to like changes in publicly funded education, that is like, this isn't like, in some cases this isn't a good environment for my children. Some people have the resources to, one parent stays home, one parent, or even
Yeah.
um, you know, not all resources are kind of monetary. Not all resources are,
That's right.
so, you may have somebody at home that may not necessarily have the capability to
Teaching.
homeschool, or
Yeah.
bring it. Some, have that capability, and they recognize, falling education standards in publicly funded education. And you're like, I can do it better. So they're coming at it from a curricular standpoint, not
Yeah.
even just kind of the content, and saying, well, I can do this better, or like my children would do better with much more focused and direct kind of
Having like
attention, like even class sizes. It's like,
yes. Yeah.
if my child is in a class with 30 or 40 kids, they're not getting the same level of attention or same level of education. That even to go back to your example, that like when public or kind of communal education was just getting off the ground,
Mhm.
you have a one room schoolhouse with
Yeah.
it's like Little House on the
Mhm.
Prairie. Like, yes, you have one teacher and you have, all
8
grades
grades.
represented,
Yeah.
but there are 15 kids in the entire school.
Yeah.
That it's, you have all these kind of different approaches, but like asking the question, should you homeschool? Should you, you know, people have different reasons and different capabilities. So, they're, yeah, they're just, uh, there's no kind of one size fits all
Yeah.
answer.
And like you said, the other thing I've heard people say, what happens if your kid has a specific way of learning, or maybe they suffer with a learning disability of some sort, like autism or whatever learning disability might be. They might actually benefit from being homeschooled versus being in school system, or it might be the opposite. They might benefit from being in the school system where you have professionals that know what they're dealing with, and the special individualized care of that the resources are available to them in
Mhm.
a school system. For instance, I know one of my families, sorry, one of my in-laws family, their kids were homeschooled, but their daughter with Down syndrome, my niece with Down syndrome, she was actually sent to school. And so all her brothers and sisters were homeschooled, but because they knew how to educate, but also push
Yeah.
my niece to where her limits were. They
Yeah.
knew how to educate her properly that my in-laws maybe weren't as familiar with. And so once they kind of got on that bandwagon, they could start to see, oh, this is what she's able to do. This is what she's, and it was a great learning experience for her to
Mm.
to be at that. And I think they would back up their decision anytime now.
Yeah.
What
So.
would you say are the pros of homeschooling?
Well, okay, so we kind of hit some of them there, but like an individualized learning plan or pace, you're one on one for the most part, or you're one on three, if you will, and so one of the biggest things that you're getting, like I mentioned, spending time with your kids, and so we really get to know, like my wife and I, it's both my wife and I work. And so it is a little bit difficult for us to sometimes homeschool. Now, my wife has taken on the majority of the homeschooling responsibilities because she works part time as a nurse, and she does a lot of night shifts, so she's scheduled that. That's how our family's done it, but it means that we're spending time with our family, and sometimes that means when I'm coming home that I'm spending an hour, 2 hours of my limited time at home doing homework with my boys, doing math or doing this or the other. But that's just part of it, right? And that's the sacrifice that you're willing to make. But so spending time with a family, and then doing trips as a family, and shared experiences as a family, that's a really nice thing. One of the big ones is customized education plan for your kids. So if you don't want them learning about this, that, or the other thing, you don't necessarily have to teach them. I encourage most people. I mean, in Ontario here, we have a curriculum. We have a curriculum that all the teachers are supposed to follow for grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's readily available online. You're able to get that. And if you don't live in Canada, you don't live in Ontario, but you still want to follow the Ontario curriculum, it's available to you for free. And you just have to look at it and ask for it, or download the PDF. That gives you what your kid needs to know by the time they're out of grade 2, let's say. That says grade 2 math, this is what they're teaching. Grade, and it's a kind of a step by step, this is what you need. And so the pros there is that you can teach them and they can be at the level or at the proper level. And with that one-to-one individualized care plan, where you are focusing solely on your kid. If they're having a hard time with their reading, let's say, you can focus and a flexible schedule. Like, we don't have to do math today because he's doing really good in math. We're going to focus all on reading. So we're going to do 2 hours of reading versus a half hour reading. And we're going to really, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're just going to read a little bit more every day. We're going to let the math slide a little bit, and then we're going to move the math back in if we're following.
And you can do that in both directions too. Like, you can do that in a remedial way where you need to catch somebody up to where they should be. If your children are accelerated, they can
keep going.
You don't need to go in lockstep with all of the kids of your own age, because that's where they're at. So we started our boys a year ahead, and our initial rationalization for that was our oldest is born in January. So like, if you were born 3 weeks earlier, he'd be in the grade ahead. And then for the other ones, we're like, we'll just start them here. If they're struggling, if they're like, we'll move them back. Like, we'll put them back. But it's working so far. And there's no real practical reason to just start them back when they're actually capable of a higher level.
Yeah, for sure.
So practically speaking, like, if someone goes to school, publicly funding schools, they're there, let's say 9 to 3 or 8 to 2:30 or whatever it might be. What does a typical day look like? Like, are the kids being homeschooled from 9 to 3?
So for our family, we start off in the morning. We start off with a family prayer time. Okay, so they start off with about 15, 20 minutes. They do the rosary, do some other things, but that's just because that's how we start our day. At 8:30, and then they get going on school. And so they start on school. Now, our kids are at the age where they can kind of start to read themselves now. So they're reading through their own lessons, and we just kind of have to more supervise, if you will, and then be there to ask questions or whatever. But we have a schedule that they do this subject, this subject, this subject, and they get to pick and choose. Like, in the morning, one of them feels like they're really a lot better at math. So they do math first. The other one feels like they do English. We have it all kind of laid out. Now, that's not necessarily available when they're younger. When they're younger, we had set times to do each one, because the parent that's staying home has to be able to work with each and every individualized kid. But for us, it starts at 8:30, and then they're typically done by noon. And so they eat lunch and then they're done. Sometimes as they get into older grades, 7 and 8, they might take a little bit longer for a subject here and there. And maybe they have to do a book report or something like that. It takes a little bit longer. But no, most of their subject, because it's so focused, they can learn. And like I said, when they hit grade 9, my boys, I have 2 of them now in high school, and both of them are top 90, like 99 students, 99 percentile, and doing great, in their academics. So if you teach them that way, you focus their learning. You don't have to, but it allows then our freedom of in the afternoon to do a lot of the other things. So it means that we can do socialized. They have skating for homeschoolers in our city. They have gymnastics. They have soccer or the gym time. So there's a whole bunch of other things that you could potentially get involved in, because there are homeschoolers around the area. But because you kind of teach.
Well, and you can look at the flexibility that homeschooling allows as an advantage or a disadvantage. So like in the advantage side, that you do have that flexibility. You can work around other activities. You can work around kind of other obligations. So one of the ways that we handle that is we schedule 4 days of school a week, and those are pretty kind of loaded days. But if they want to go to Bible study on Friday, they're motivated to get their work done. If it's something they need more time with, we have that overflow day. We can structure. But again, that flexibility that homeschooling introduces, some people who maybe aren't as organized or aren't as structure their day, it could be kind of, they could get behind on their lessons. They could get to May or June and be like, we're only halfway through this curriculum, and it could be a problem. So again, there's an advantage there, but again, if you're not if you don't have that approach, or if you don't have that level of care, you can
And
engage.
it's not without its own worrisomes, I gotta
Hmm.
say, because yeah, even in the homeschooling community that we've been a part of, anyways, there's different ideals of what's right, what's wrong, and how to raise your
Hmm.
kid. I'm a teacher, and a lot of the people that we go with have that teaching background
Hmm.
or have a teacher in the family, and we stick to the Ontario curriculum, meaning we follow the Ontario curriculum, and this is what our kids have to learn by this time, and everything else. I have other families that decide to learn other ways, and they don't have the same benchmarks that we might have for our kids. We've chosen what we've chosen for our
Hmm.
family because I want my kids to be able to hit grade 9 running with the ground running. Other families have other put other values first, and so that's how they've raised their kid. Right or wrong, there are going to be feelings, and it's hot topics when it gets to it
Yeah.
for sure. There's tempers flare and words are said, but every parent has the right to choose. The Catholic Church supports that,
Hmm.
right? Like it's to grow raise their child. The only thing that you can do is support each parent's right for that.
Hmm.
So, what would you say are some cons, like cons to homeschooling?
Yeah, well, we already touched on it, but one of the main things that people, or like, that kind of early stigma around homeschooling is like, okay, well, you can smell the weird. Like like
Yeah.
that that you have this association that like they're socially awkward, they're not
Mhm.
properly socialized because they're yes, their primary influence is their family, but in some cases, their only influence is their family,
Yeah.
and that can hinder development in a lot of
Other
different
ways.
ways. So even before even before becoming Catholic, even before being involved with homeschooling communities, I had exposure to a bunch of homeschooled kids in the college that I went to, and it was interesting because you had almost a 50-50 split of these students were homeschooled, kindergarten all the way through high school, and you had a really hard time holding a conversation with them, or they
Yeah.
had a really difficult time talking about or engaging with anything that was outside of their own kind of focused experience. I had others who were homeschooled kindergarten to grade one, kindergarten to
Grade 12. Yeah.
to grade 12. But yeah, I'm OAC because I'm old.
Yeah.
But and perfectly socialized, perfectly
Yeah.
socially capable. So it really comes down to, again, those reasons for homeschooling. Like if your motivation is to isolate your children from the world, yes, there's a protective element there, but there's also a risk.
Yeah.
And, on the other hand, you have parents who are invested in the social development of their children, and there are a number of ways that you can kind of address that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think the biggest con. So I want to just kind of make it for some parents have the feeling every parent should homeschool, and I'm going to
Mm.
disagree with that. I'm I'm a parent that homeschools, but I'm going to say it's not necessarily for
For
everybody.
everyone.
Yeah,
That's right.
there's a time and energy commitment to that. That we are lucky enough to have my wife have her like she's able to kind of maneuver her schedule so that she can be home during the week. She works on the weekends, on the night shifts, so when she is sleeping, and then we have grandma come over for one day a week, and she kind of helps teach the kids all different things, and whether it be gardening or other stuff, and but we have that resource at our
Mm.
disposal. It's a time commitment, but it's also a financial commitment. You have to buy the books, you have to buy the stuff. I mean, a lot of it's available online. If you want to do the extra work for it, it's available, but there's a time commitment, there's a financial commitment, and then the other big one is like you kind of said, what's your
Yeah.
exposure? What is your kids actually being
Mhm.
exposed to? What for us, we made a point that we wanted to expose our kids socially. So we wanted to
Mhm.
bring our kids to everything, anything and everything that we could. We wanted to have them be exposed to pretty much anything. I can't remember which saint said it, but be in the world, not of the
Mhm.
world, right? And so we wanted to show them everything, be a part of everything. But then sometimes what it did was open up great conversations that we could kind of come home from an activity or event, and a kid said this, or this happened at this place, and then we could kind of dive into it from a parental
Mm.
perspective, teaching them, well, this is what we believe, this is why we like why mommy and daddy don't swear, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
That's like things like that, but we can have that open conversation, and being the first educators.
Educators. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can really kind of, they come to us with their questions, which is great. One of the other big ones is lack of accreditation, and so depending on how you do it, you sometimes can't, like, how do you know they have a grade 9
Yeah.
credit. So
Yeah.
it's lucky for us that we like you can go in, you can get tested and that kind of stuff, or you just put them in grade 9 and hopefully they can make it.
Yeah.
But like I said, my kids probably are a little bit above in certain things that they could probably have jumped in higher, but we put them in grade 9 and get them in there, and then they go from there. But the lack of accreditation. So when you get to grade 12, let's say you go all the way through to grade 12, how does a college or university accept you when you don't have a grade? When you
Mhm.
don't like how they can maybe do some testing or maybe like so there are ways around it. There are accredited homeschooled online courses that you can maybe take and get some actual accredited courses and stuff. But they're like those are all things that you have to consider. Um, and then yeah, those I mean
Or
that's the big things.
if I can,
Yeah,
what you were saying about being in the world, not of the world.
yeah,
Like there's another good reason for, again, I homeschool, but another good reason for not homeschooling is evangelization. Like
yeah.
that if you have this, responsible parents are pulling their children out of the school system en masse, and it's like you're removing a lot of what would be the kind of positive influence
That
for a
your
lot of
kid
the
could
other
be.
kids. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's a good
And so,
call.
and especially when you have that kind of that stability, or you already have that, understanding of, parents as first educators
Yeah,
in the home, that's, your child is moving out from a position of strength that they,
yes.
yes, they encounter things in the public system that, they probably shouldn't or may not be age appropriate or maybe kind of ideologically motivated. It's like, but they can bring that home and they can have a conversation with their parents and they have that kind of stability that they can engage with that without the same measure of risk.
Yeah.
So let's, there are options for homeschooling. You've listed pros and cons and things for people to consider. Now, let's say someone says, like I wish I could homeschool. Right now, my kids are in the publicly funded system. They are learning some things that I'm not quite comfortable with. What is the approach for a parent in this situation? Like how do we keep an eye on what our kids are learning?
Mm-hmm.
I think having those conversations. So I have two boys right now in public school, if you will, but Catholic high school, and having those lines of communication open. So actually, specifically spending time to actually sit down and talk, and then talk about their day. But and then like, hey, did you learn anything? What did you learn? How did you learn? And specifically pointing out, okay, what happened and why, and then okay, what did you say or what did you think about that? What did you? And so we can help them digest what's being learned at the school and that stuff. And you also have a right as parents to step up and demand to hold our schools accountable, to say this is not okay, this is not okay. Like write your letters. Don't sit back. Like I don't mind protesting. I'm never one against protesting if you're going to go march the streets and stuff. But make sure that that's not all you're doing.
Yeah,
Make sure there's a like you're writing the letters so
exactly.
that
Or you
people
have communication with your teacher, your
exactly
principals,
exactly.
parent council.
If I deal with this a lot, but just if the person doesn't know what they're doing is wrong or that you feel it's wrong, they're not going to change because they don't understand or they don't realize it. So having those open lines of communication, talking to the teacher, and if the teacher's not going to listen to you, then potentially talk to the principal. And if the principal's not talking to you, then maybe you got to look at other modes of education, whatever that might be, switching to a private school or switching to a different school or switching to homeschooling or whatever. There are plenty of kids though that have gone through the public system. I mean, you were looking at them here that have made it through the public system, have completely kept their faith and haven't gone like what I'm going to say is you really have to take it on your own personal level, take it to prayer, see what's going to be best for your family. I mean, if you feel like homeschooling but you don't have the resources, then ask God to either provide you the resources or provide you with the opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to talk to your kids and make sure that give protect your family. Give ask God for those resources to protect your family.
Yeah, I think a part of the parents' responsibility. I mean, we want to give people the benefit of the doubt, and we want to say, our teachers are great, and they're doing a great work with our
And a lot of
young
them are.
people. A
Yeah.
lot of them are,
Yeah.
of course, they are. And there are some situations that happen at school, whether through the teacher in the classroom or other peers, where your kids are exposed to things that you're not comfortable with yet, or at all. I
Yeah.
don't know. But I think it's really important that that we keep an eye on that. And unfortunately, it does happen where there are things that are either taught or said at school where schools themselves, administrators or teachers,
Mm-hmm.
keep them from the parents, or things that kids reveal to teachers that are kept from parents. And I think that continues to build an attitude of distrust
Mhm.
between parents
Animosity. Yeah.
and teachers, and turns into frustration,
Oh yeah.
animosity, which, you say, well, then we take it to the streets and we
Yeah.
start protesting instead of having our conversations. But there is a place and time for protest. There is a place and time for conversation.
Mhm.
And I think the more we keep the lines of dialogue open and keep an ear to our kids, like
Yeah.
what's happening at school. I think you told me, Josh, something you tell your kids often
Yeah.
is, someone who says, "Don't tell your parents,"
Yeah.
you tell us immediately.
Exactly.
Like those aren't people
That you can
that
trust.
we
Mhm.
can
Yeah.
trust,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
and I think that's good because that does happen. As me, who's in the schools often,
Yeah.
I know of situations where the school has kept quiet, and the parents were left in the dark
Yeah.
about certain things. It's not right
No.
for me, and not just for me. I think it's the truth. Parents have birthed someone into the world. They have prime uh,
Mhm.
custodialship
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
of this human being that they brought into the world. And teachers have these children for a few hours a day,
Mhm.
for a small snippet of their life. And then they kind of send these kids home to their parents to deal with the mess of what they've learned or
Yeah.
heard at school. And then parents are often left picking up the pieces of the mess that's happened. It's not right. It's not right to do that to parents. Parents are the prime educators, the prime leaders. They have ownership
Yeah.
over their children,
Yeah.
for lack of better words, and they should be involved in every step of their
Mhm.
child's
I
of
think
raising their child.
the flip side to that is that not every parent takes the same responsibility,
Well, and
and
this is the other thing too.
and that's the hard
You
part,
know,
right?
hiding things from parents
Yeah.
is appropriate when there's a level of danger.
You're
When
right.
kids are in a situation where there's danger,
That's a
then
different.
of course
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we tread lightly. We involve the children's aid
Police if you have to or whatever.
agencies,
Yeah.
police, security. That's a totally different story. But to arbitrarily hide things from parents because you don't want them knowing we said that to your kid, and there's no level of danger,
Yeah.
there's
Mhm.
something wrong.
Yeah.
There's something
Agreed.
wrong. And I think that
We need to stand up. We need to start standing up and saying that this is not going to be okay. This is not going to be accepted. That we're not going to stand behind things being like parents. Parents are the first educators. Parents are the people that get to choose. And even if I don't agree, like I said before, with your way of homeschooling, or your way of the way that you taught your kid, you still have that right. They are your child, unless of course you're putting them in danger for some reason. But
Yeah.
but because your opinion is not my opinion doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's necessarily wrong, right? And so
That's right.
I have to respect that.
Yeah. And this is something that's been kind of it's been a thing in Catholic and Christian, and like even the fact that this march was organized by Muslim, like that this isn't an exclusively Catholic
No,
idea,
not at all. No.
and like more so, and especially after the pandemic, that people like even secular people are kind of realizing that that the education system may not be kind of the best environment for my kid for curricular reasons, or for even exposure reasons, or
Mhm.
even the fact that a lot of the kids in the 90s when we went to school, people weren't carrying around smartphones with whatever on them
Yeah,
that
good
is
call.
exposing their kids to like
Whatever.
either not age appropriate or not appropriate in any
Yeah.
situation. That it's like it like people are waking up outside of kind of
Religious.
the
Yeah.
specifically religious kind of framework, to say that just from a protective and taking responsibility for preparing their children, that this is gaining some traction as the march kind of.
At the end of the day, it's like, having an involvement in what
Mhm.
your kids are up to is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a good thing for parents
Yeah.
to do.
Having a good
Whether it's
relationship.
whether it's within the education system, or what friends they hang out with, or where they're at. You don't have to coddle your children, or
Yeah.
spy on them when they're out with their friends, or
Helicopter
whatever.
parents. You don't. Yeah.
Helicopter parenting. But having a good relationship, we're trying to raise good citizens. We're trying to raise
Yeah.
good people of goodwill,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
our scriptures say, right? But a parent and a child should always be in communication with each other
Mhm.
about a wide variety of things. It's not just school. So
Anything
I
and
think,
everything.
as much as we're saying I'm saying, I'm not going to
Yeah.
speak for you guys. I'm saying that schools need to clean up their act a little bit.
Yeah.
Like schools need to
Yep.
clean up their act, and teachers need to teach what the curriculum is, and leave their own personal agendas out of it. But parents also
Yeah.
have to
Step
be
up.
motivated to say, I know my life is busy. I know I work all these hours, or I'm struggling in this area, and my attention is over here, or there's a family issue that I need to focus on. But these are our children who need your attention. These are your children who need you to walk beside them, to journey with them, to know what's going on in their life. And you know what? We need parents to try even harder, because you know who's the worst at speaking, at telling what's going on in their life? It's children and teenagers. They don't
Teenagers.
want to talk. They don't want nothing. What happened today? Nothing.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
well, it's like, well, we need to build better relationships with our young people, to say, because something is happening.
Yeah.
Something is happening, and I think our children are going through so much that, so we need effort on both parts, parents, schools, everyone in between.
Yeah.
All right, well, you got me riled up on our first episode back for season 4. So thanks for the good conversation, and kudos to parents who are homeschooling. Kudos to parents who are having good relationship with their children. Kudos to teachers who are doing great jobs out there. I think it's really it's an important issue to talk about, because it's close to our heart. It's our children. We love our children, and we care about their future,
Yeah.
and our future too, because one day those young people will be taking care of old us, right?
They'll be the ones sitting here on the podcast.
Exactly. So if you have a strong feeling one way or another, and you want to share it with us, please drop it in our comments, either on our social media pages, or you could send us a direct email at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com. But give us what you think. What's the struggle in homeschooling? Would you choose it? Have you chosen it? Or are you big fans of the publicly funded system? Share with us what you think. That's it for this first episode of season 4. We got lots more coming this season. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on the Catholic Buzz.